Pressure, stress, risk, these are all perceptions that are due to our attributions, how we think about and explain things to ourselves. And so if we reframe, change, adjust, move the needle on our attributions, how we think about things, then they feel less distressful. Then we can dissolve pressure. Then risk feels like more of, is this dangerous or is this a risk? And do I enjoy risk taking? Because I know that it gets me to the edge of my capacity. And when I'm on the edge of my capacity, I have the opportunity to grow.
That's two-time Olympian, two-time silver medalist, and performance mindset coach Nicole Davis. Up next on the All Things Risk podcast. Welcome and welcome back to the All Things Risk podcast. My name is Ben Catania. I am your host. This is my show. I am a risk professional and a forever student of uncertainty. And around here, I talk to some of the most knowledgeable and fascinating people on this planet, and we explore uncertainty in just about all of its forms. Before we begin with the latest episode, a reminder that we've got a fantastic online course, How to Make Impossible Decisions with Calm and Confidence. And for all of you listening, the first module is free. Just go to all-things-risk.teachable.com to find out more, or click on the link in the show notes. All right, let's get into it. Today, we have Nicole Davis on the show in a conversation about uncertainty and mindset. Nicole is a retired volleyball player who excelled at the very highest levels of the sport. And that means the Olympics, where she won a silver medal for the US in 2008 in the Olympic Games in Beijing. And then 4 years later, the same thing in London. She's played professionally in Europe, and she played for the University of Southern California, where she won back-to-back national championships with the team in 2002 and 2003. Now, Nicole is a professional mindset coach with Compete to Create, a company that was founded by Super Bowl winning coach Pete Carroll of the Seattle Seahawks and prominent high-performance psychologist Michael Gervais. This is a conversation that I absolutely loved, and it's one that's all about mindset and the practices that Olympians like Nicole have used, and understanding how they can be applied to just about any context. And that, of course, means risk and uncertainty. Nicole shares a number of useful thoughts and very well-considered insights around things like dealing with pressure, overcoming setbacks, tackling uncertainty and risk, how to build a high-performance culture in any team or organization, and a lot more. And a lot of that was born in what it takes to be an Olympian and what it takes to compete at the very highest levels of a sport. And I think that you will love this conversation. So let's get into it. Here is Nicole Davis. Welcome to the All Things Risk podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on, and this is the first Olympian I've had on the podcast, so welcome.
Woohoo! Yeah, fired up to be.
For my listeners,
first Olympian.
Yeah, I've had a Paralympian on, but not an Olympian. So this is great. This is new territory, and I want to get into all kinds of cool stuff. But before we do that, it might be great if you could give my listeners a little bit of background as to who you are and what you do and all of that good stuff.
Sure. My name is Nicole Davis. I'm a retired two-time Olympian. I competed in the 2008 London Olympics and the 2008 Beijing Olympics, 2012 London Olympics. And then I retired in 2015. My sport was indoor volleyball. Fortunate to be a two-time medalist as well at those Olympics. I've played professionally during my 12-year career in 8 different countries outside of the United States. When I retired in 2015, I teamed up with a company here in the United States called Compete to Create, which was co-founded by the head coach of the Super Bowl winning Seattle Seahawks American Football Club and a very prominent sport performance psychologist by the name of Dr. Michael Gervais, who's maybe most widely known for the work that he's done with folks like Felix Baumgartner on the Red Bull Stratos project. And what Compete to Create does and what I do is essentially mindset training and cultural development. So I'm now finishing a master's in sport and performance psychology, and I'm starting a doctorate degree in clinical psychology in the fall. And this is my new Olympics.
That's quite an interesting background, and I want to get into all of that stuff. But maybe before we dive into mindset, could you talk a little bit about your volleyball career, and I guess how did you get into volleyball in the first place? What was it when how did the sport find you? Did you find it?
I'm not the Olympian that was 6 years old watching the 92 Olympics or something, and I just knew in that moment that I wanted to be an Olympic athlete. That actually wasn't the case. I didn't start playing volleyball until I was 14, which these days is really late to start a sport. I'm also quite short. I'm 165 centimeters. Most of my teammates are 185 to 2 meters 10. At least on the world stage, that's what it's like. And so I had done other sports when I was a kid. I have a black belt in martial arts, and before that I did softball, and I was kind of just the kid that that was never in the house, and if there wasn't a game to play outside, I'd make up a game. But when I was going to high school, I decided I missed being on a team sport because martial arts is an individual sport, and volleyball looked like fun. That's really it. I didn't know a ton about it. I had played maybe twice in my entire young life, and so I signed up for tryouts. And I think I asked my mom like the night before to go buy some knee pads for me. I really had no idea what I was getting myself into. And I made a team, and the girls and the coaches were encouraging me to play what we have in the United States called club volleyball. I didn't know what that was, but I knew I was having fun. So I decided, well, if I can keep having fun, then why not? And so the rest was history, kind of, with volleyball. I got recruited to go to the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, which is historically a very prominent school, especially for volleyball. Kind of by accident, the coach came to our club practice to watch my 6'4" is 192 centimeter attacker, and he saw me and handed me his card, and he said, "Hey, we don't have any scholarship money for you, but we'd love for you to be a part of our program." And we had the number 1 recruiting class in the country already without me committing to go. Part of that recruiting class was April Ross, who's one of the most widely known beach volleyball players in the world now, 2-time Olympian and medalist. And so, I agreed to go on a visit to the University of Southern California, and I left there just wanting to go to that school because of everything it represented, and I wanted to win championships. However, my mom only had $30,000 saved for my college tuition or my college education, and if you're not familiar, that pays for like half a semester at USC these days. Yeah, and so I don't know what she was thinking or what I was thinking, but
we went for it.
We went for it, yeah. And I ended up earning a full ride scholarship to USC. I feel really fortunate for that. Not to be,
awesome.
$250,000 plus in debt when I ended that. But volleyball, when I went to USC, was still a means to an end for me. I was gonna, go to law school or something.
Okay, or something. Did you know what you wanted to be? Like you're playing volleyball and you got really, obviously absorbed into it, but did you have any other vision or aspiration beyond that?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a doctor, a medical doctor, and maybe an orthopedic surgeon or something of that nature. I remember in the United States when I was a kid, there was a channel on the television that was the surgery channel, and they would live stream. What must not have been live streamed, but at that time, but they would play surgeries,
like play-by-play heart surgery and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I was watching for whatever reason. But then a couple things happened. When I got to USC, I became more engrossed in volleyball, and it really is a full-time gig to be a student athlete. And the second thing is I realized that I didn't like blood in real time. It changes things a little bit. So I just shifted gears, and I think I started studying political science because my boyfriend at the time was studying it, and law sounded interesting to me. I had taken, at the time, a constitutional law class that was taught by the district attorney of Los Angeles at the time, who was on the O.J. Simpson case. So I that was like really compelling for me. But what ended up happening is during my last year at university, the USA team essentially invited me to come train. Wow. And so that's not something that you typically say no to unless you're really convicted that you're not going to play anymore. And so I actually left school a semester early to join the USA team and turn professional, so to speak, in the sport of volleyball. And then after that, it's this big machine. It's like a snowball kind of effect. And that was a really difficult period of time on the USA team. And I was so naive. I had no idea what I was doing. I went to play professionally in a small village in Poland, my first professional season, before Poland was even part of the EU. So there were no highways. Very few people spoke English, but I was just in it, and exploring and trying to figure out if this was something I really wanted to go 2 feet in.
Right. Did you I take it you had lots of other offers besides USC to go to university?
I kind of. So the libero position didn't yet exist in university, even though it did internationally. And so the coach at USC had an idea that maybe that rule would go into effect during my 4 years at university. So he recruited me for that position. So I actually became the first person to play the libero position at the University of Southern California. And that was my 3rd year at university. But because I'm small, I was actually recruited to a lot of smaller universities, less high profile, but I'm maybe the most competitive person that I know. And so I really wanted to win national championships and be around people who were the best at what they did. And so that was part of the draw to USC. In the United States, the same 6 universities have historically won most of the national championships for the last 3-4 decades. And USC is one of those universities.
Wow. And I guess it's you mentioned that it's kind of a full-time, well, it is a full-time job, isn't it, being a student athlete in the United States? We don't really have that. I mean, I'm based in London and I grew up in Canada. We don't really have the equivalent of a student athlete here. I mean, people just, they go into the professional ranks basically in different sports. So it is quite different. Could you maybe describe a little bit like what you took away from the USC experience? And you won national championships, and you really were at the top of your game for that level of play. What was it like?
It was hard. We were really good, but it was the first time that I'd been in a situation where I had to manage myself as an individual, as a young adult, and time management was hard. So I remember there was a class that in the spring we trained at 7 o'clock in the morning, and then we had to go to class all day after that. And I remember there's one class that I went to maybe twice the entire semester, and fell asleep both times, like I barely passed that class. So as a student athlete, I found myself being really distracted by sport, where in the past I was a straight A student. I got really good marks in school, in high school, leading up to university. And so it was a struggle for me to balance training, which was about a 4-hour commitment during every day during the season. And then plus we would play twice a week, and sometimes every other week we would travel. So that would mean we would miss school as well, and have to make that up. So to balance the athletic portion plus all of the studies, and then trying to be like a normal young adult, 18 to 3 years old with a social life and all that. So I was trying to figure a lot out. In the United States, these are the most formative years for most young adults, is their time at university. For that reason, they're off leash and having to do things on their own and figuring out their own identity outside of their family unit and all that stuff. And so it's a lot to process at that age. And then to be at an elite level as well, where certain opportunities are opening up and you have to make decisions about what the next part of your life is going to be like, can also be challenging. A lot of people hesitate to leave school early, as I did, to pursue kind of a dream that's really not that likely to happen. It's less than 15% of people who actually train on the USA team that make an Olympic team. That being said, it's like really wonderful, hard-earned lessons, amazing friendships. University of Southern California is an amazing place. The family that exists because of that university throughout the world. For example, when London hosted the Olympics, there's around 900 alumni that live in London. Wow. And they hosted, there were 39 athletes from the University of Southern California at the London Olympics, which University of Southern California has also sent the most number of athletes to the Olympics of any university in the United States. So the alumni of USC hosted us at the Oxford and Cambridge Club before the London Olympics kicked off. So just when you're recruited to the University of Southern California, as is the case with many universities, they talk about the network and the family. And that's been one of the coolest things for me. Is as I've traveled the world, I've found people that have been a part of my USC family all over the world. And it was really in London that was the first time I reconnected to that. Right. It's important to, I don't say to know people, and like I hate to sound privileged in that, but like to have people that are part of your tribe, that are like-minded, that are willing to like lock arms and do difficult things with you and for you. That's a pretty neat thing.
Yeah, it sounds wonderful when you describe it, and I follow U.S. college sports. Actually, it's one of the most fascinating types of sport that exists, because it's not quite professional, but it's certainly not. I don't think it's amateur, and you get these schools that have these sort of traditions and shared histories, and there's an aspect of it that is really amazing. And when you describe your London experience, that sounds incredibly cool. But then, like when you shifted to the Olympics, how, because you clearly had something that perhaps others didn't have. Would you say it was like grit or raw talent, or like what was it that that kind of got you noticed? And then when you moved into the Olympic system, you said it goes up a level, but I mean, how much of a jump was it? Like, what were you? Because we keep hearing this stuff about there was always, when I was growing, there's always like the odd kid that was like, I don't know, figure skater or swimmer or something, and like they just didn't have a life, they were just trying to make the Olympics, and so it'd be useful to. Very interesting, actually, to hear what that experience was like, because so few of us go through that at that level of intensity.
Yeah, I think I was maybe the best in the country at the university level at the position I played, which is why I got noticed. So talent, yes. I would say raw athleticism. I'm a really good athlete, and I don't mean to toot my horn in any way. I feel fortunate in that, but I've always picked up things really well. I have great kinesthetic awareness. And so actually when I went to USC, I would consider myself a good athlete, not a good volleyball player. And I kind of became a good volleyball player with great training and experience there. And so that's how I got noticed and invited to the USA team. once you're on the USA team, you don't last long if you're not gritty. You don't last long if you don't have great effort and you're not deliberate about how you're approaching every single day. So talent is fairly even once you get to the world stage in most sports, with the exception of Usain Bolt, Michael Phelps, those types of folks. Most talent is fairly even at the world stage. And, you know, it may be cliche to say the margins are thin, but it's true. And so what set me apart from some others was my ability to learn at a fast clip and to stay in it when there were plateaus and when things felt really uncomfortable, and to just absolutely be committed to learning. The thing that is unique about grit that doesn't get talked about, and why it's maybe different, there's some controversy in the scientific community about whether or not grit is actually different than other skill sets, is that, and I think this is something that sets Olympic athletes apart from a lot of other people, is that there's a willingness to do difficult things even when there's not positive feedback or reinforcement present. And if we just look at humans and how humans learn, you know, we're conditioned in some sort of way that when we get positive reinforcement for the way that we act, then we're more likely to do that again. When you're an elite athlete, you fundamentally design your life around being uncomfortable. That often comes with difficult and harsh feedback. And most people aren't willing to have difficult feedback or a lack of feedback or reinforcement and still stay in it. And I think that those that really thrived in that environment were able to provide it on their own, or were really, really clear on what they thought was possible for them. We would call that, at Good Beat to Great, we'd call that having a vision for your life. So they're mission-minded, purpose-driven, you know, so that when it's difficult, which it is every single day, that you can stay in it long enough to get to what could be something amazing for you.
So at some point, the kind of the athlete that was groomed by their parents, who, you know, have all these resources perhaps and want to live vicariously through their children, that'll run out. And those who are really at that level are those that have that, you know, that fire that they stoke from within, I suppose. Is that fair?
Yeah, some of the most athletic, dynamic players that I played against in university couldn't cut it for more than 2 weeks on the national team, because they didn't know how to operate in that environment, and to be able to sustain some sort of motivation and passion for the work when it's that difficult and you're not sure if it's going to work out. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the process of becoming an Olympic athlete, and it's that by nature is anxiety provoking for most people. And so when anxiety is on board, lots of things take place. And if you don't have a great lens for what could happen in the future, then you're more likely to pack it up and quit, or just kind of go the side of apathy and shut down when things don't go your way. And that's not conducive for pursuing your potential.
Can we talk a little bit about uncertainty here? Because you mentioned it, and it's what I find fascinating is, you know, everyone at that Olympic level has the talent, and I suppose for some that kind of crave the certainty, it's more, you know, they can perhaps power through things via their talent. But when you put yourself into these situations where you don't know the outcome, whether or not you'll be selected, and what the outcome, I suppose this translates into particular, you know, during games and matches. It might be, I'd love to hear your thoughts on uncertainty and, you know, putting yourself in those difficult places, because you know, people who train hard and work hard, you know, at a level, I suppose it's about getting some certainty that, you know, we'll have that level of success. But at some point, at that really, really high level, there's that uncertainty that, and as you say, that could be lead to harsh feedback, which is difficult to get, difficult to hear.
Yeah,
love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, there's a lot wrapped up in that to paint the picture of what it was like for me to be an athlete. And this is somewhat true across many different sports, is that we trained for 8 hours a day. And in the USA volleyball gym, every ball that we touch is statted. So in our gym, there are several cameras that are set up. It feels like Big Brother. Everything you do and say is caught on camera, and it's being coded as we're practicing.
Whoa.
And so every ball you touch is statted, and every drill you do is statted, whether you win or lose and what the score was. And sometimes it felt like, our conversations were being statted as well. And so you, there's a certain percentage that you're expected to execute at. For example, for my position, you want to receive serve at a 72% efficiency, and you want to play defense at a 66% efficiency. So you don't get the right to stay in the gym if you don't stat out for 2 weeks, for example.
Jeez.
And I've seen people leave in shorter time than that, And so there is this element of like needing to execute at a high level, but the recognition that there's so much that's outside of your control, those types of outcomes, And what becomes really clear in sport is that you can influence outcomes, but you can't control them. And so, the skill of letting go, for example, of what's not in your control, is, I would say, the more difficult aspect. As athletes, it's really clear for us, like the processes that we need to invest in to extract potential, and we've got such a great team of, volleyball coaches, strength and conditioning coaches, nutrition coaches, like sports med physio, like we have all of the component pieces available to us to do it, but it's like the mental piece of it is, while you're in it, are you able to be uncommonly consistent about focusing on the things that aren't in your control? And then the deal is, and this is what is hard, is that, you could be the best in the world in your position. And maybe the coach doesn't feel like you're the right puzzle piece for the team, and you don't get to go. Or maybe you're the best in the world, a world record holder even. And this is true for swimming. And in the United States, for example, the qualifications for the Olympics, sometimes the third place person doesn't get to go to the Olympics, but he or she's qualifying time at the trials is fast enough to win a medal at the Olympics compared to, so that, like, what if that's the case? Or what if, and this has happened in volleyball, what if you're the best in the world and a week before your team leaves for the Olympics, you have a career-ending injury? So there's so much that you can't account for as an athlete that is out of your control. There's so much uncertainty in every single day. Injury is a consistent uncertainty. That the focus on that or allowing it to be a distraction is really suboptimal. And so athletes will spend, those that are able to stay in it longer will entertain it, right? Because you care. Otherwise, like, if you didn't care about outcomes, I would say hang it up. Like, there's no reason for you to be there. They do matter, right? And that's the invisible handshake of it all. It's like, hey, we love you. We want you to be the best Nicole you can possibly be in this gym. But by the way, if you don't stat out, you can't be here anymore, right? So we all have that invisible handshake in the jobs that we do every single day. And so outcomes do matter, but we can only influence them. We can't control them. And so when we hyper focus or allow them to be too much of a distraction, then we start to feel anxious. We start to feel overwhelmed and out of control. And that does not lead to good performance. And our experience in the process really suffers. And so, like, I try to index away from performance because I've performed optimally under suboptimal conditions. Like, we can perform quite well when there's internal chaos in the mind and in the body. We can do that. It's exhausting. It's more exhausting. But we can perform when things aren't quite right. But the experience really suffers, And so, like, what's the point of doing all of this if you can't find joy in it? If you can't, like, kind of grin, your familiar grin when things are getting really difficult around you? For me, that is the most beautiful thing about having command of mind and training mindset skills, is to be able to smile when things get difficult, because you're certain that something good is on the other side of that.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And as you were describing this, this process of being statted out and things like that, like I was thinking about, well, that, if you've started this sport because you love playing it and have this joy, they talk about like footballers, soccer players like Lionel Messi and players like this who have this sort of joy with the ball at their feet and so on. But if you're focusing on, I performed really badly on that last drill, I wonder what my stats are. That sounds like it could be very oppressive and inhibiting of great performance. So it's that trick. There's also, you talked about martial arts and one of the things in sparring in any martial art is being relaxed, but you're facing somebody who wants to kick the crap out of you. So, it's hard to relax. So it's just finding that window, like, as a mindset coach and sports psychologist and so forth, I guess what you're saying is this is something you can train.
That's right. Yeah, you can, that window that you're talking about is something that we would call like finding calm, which is like the sweet spot between what it feels like for you when you first wake up in the morning and if you, when you're super highly activated. So let's imagine if you've almost just gotten in a car accident, in that moment where in less than 1 second, your heart rate suddenly comes up to 180, 190 beats per second. Your breathing is up high in your chest and rapid. You've got all the feels, you're trembling, right? That's high activation. There's this sweet spot right in the middle that's unique to you that we're able to perform optimally. So a little bit of activation, not too much activation. And having awareness of what that is like for you and being able to drop into that is a skill. And so like public speaking is a good example. Many people don't like it. It's one of the top 3 fears worldwide. Most people, if they don't like public speaking, what will take place for them is when they start, they'll be overactivated. They'll maybe forget their words, kind of be narrowly focused, fumble around a bit. And then as they go through it, then they'll work their way into that sweet spot. Athletes fall under a trap as well, and they do the opposite, is that they'll train underactivated because a lot of people think that, it's just training. It doesn't matter as much as the game, right? So they'll train underactivated, they'll get into the game, and then suddenly it feels like a big moment and they're overactivated. So then the same thing kind of happens, right? They're having to work their way down into that sweet spot. As the match is going on, as you're performing, as you're speaking to a crowd, or as you're, playing the sport. And you can train yourself to be able to drop into that space right away. Some of that comes from breathing. Some of that comes from our relationship with challenge and our awareness of our thoughts that are linked to that physiological activation. But there's lots of skill sets that we can train. Being present, for example, is something that we can train. And we look at mastery and performance that is excellent. It's usually just the byproduct of linking moments together and just being where your feet are. And we can train that as well, So there's lots of skill sets that we can turn to have command of mind in moments that feel like stress or feel like pressure is involved.
What do you mean by linking moments together?
Yeah, so the natural state of our mind is quite sloppy and unregulated. It's curious. We joke that it's like a drunk monkey, and so part of that reason is that the brain is designed for safety, and there's a part of the network of the brain called the default mode network that is really just kind of all day we're walking around, and that's going, am I okay? Am I okay? Am I okay now? As it's trying to figure out, like, is this a safe space? And so we really still have an ancient brain in modern times. There aren't saber-toothed tigers and bushes anywhere, at least not in the United States. And so, we're looking for threat that really isn't there. The greatest threat most of us experience on a day-to-day basis is, the fear of judgment, that what he or she thinks of me could be bad. And that's enough to activate the same system, the emergency response system, which can be suboptimal for performance. And so, our mind is quite undisciplined. And so if we want to have a disciplined mind, for example, to just be able to pay attention to our breath the in breath and the out breath. For 2 breaths, most people, their mind will become distracted. I wonder what's for lunch today.
Right,
I can't believe my boss said that. And so the real skill is like being more aware of when that takes place and then coming back to your breath. Mm-hmm. Right. Now, in performance, that's like becoming aware that I'm still thinking about the mistake I just made, and then just coming back to being where my feet are. Because when I can just be here now, then I can actually access all the training I've done in my craft. And then I can pay attention to the cues, both the internal cues and the external cues that are necessary for me to be able to execute on my craft. But if I'm thinking about the past, thinking about the future, it's really hard to filter through all of that noise to just get to the signal and to be able to access our craft and perform with a sense of like automaticity.
Yeah. And I suppose if you're training yourself or, putting yourself in these uncomfortable positions on a regular basis, then it's easier to recognize when those things are happening. And a lot of us, unfortunately, we kind of, we have moments when we sleepwalk through, not sleepwalk, but it is the default. Like we our, routines and our default mode network is kind of embedded, into our day-to-day lives very often. We're kind of, we're not really present. We're driving, but we're daydreaming, or we're looking at our phones and distractions always there. It's really it's harder and harder to be present.
Absolutely. So, the question is like, what are we doing? What is the antidote to all of that? Because, our world has changed significantly, and there is more external noise, and there are lots of shiny things that distract us more readily. And so if we want to have a more disciplined mind, not just for performance, but because like we experience joy and flourishing and thriving, like everything there is about life. And you can think about like your most fulfilling times in life were not when you were on your phone or when you were responding to emails. They were in moments where you were fully engrossed and doing something for the intrinsic joy, the nature of it, because you enjoy it and because you, as humans, we like progress, and probably doing it with other people that you really vibe with. And so it's not just about performance. It's like, how do you experience the most joy in life? And it's like to be present, to be here now, and to be engrossed in what you're doing. So mindfulness meditation is one way, one antidote, so to speak, to all of the noise that we're experiencing these days.
Yeah, that's so true. And one of the reasons why I love speaking to athletes and having athletes here is because the training and also the competition and everything, it's kind of like a magnifying glass where all of these things are, they're transferable, but there's nothing like the pressure of a match in the Olympics, right? And so you can transfer some of these skills, that's what I love about the whole compete to create thing, and I love that course and the mindset training and when you speak, it really comes across the transferability. It's I think it's quite wonderful. But I did also want to talk about what happens when things go wrong and how you have learned to train yourself when something doesn't go your way, either in the high stakes world of Olympic sport or beyond that. How do you recover when something has happened that you didn't really like? Yeah, it's a big surprise. Yeah.
I think there's a lot to pull on with this question, to be honest. There are a couple of things. One is like just the realization is like things don't go as planned very often. And so then like where do you go from that? So part of this is just like I think for many of us, we want to derive confidence from our preparation or having past experience doing something. And this incessant need to be perfectly prepared gets in the way of us just really expressing ourselves in moments when we have an opportunity to go for it, whether that is in athletics or in the thing you care about most in your role at work, whatever it is, being a mom or a dad. And so for me, how I've come to understand how to move through times of change or challenge or transition is to anchor to the idea that everything that I have is already within me. We've done the work, all of us. Everyone listening has done the work. You have what it takes. Can you adjust and can you figure it out, though? That is the real skill. Not can you be perfect, but can you adjust? Because things aren't going to go as planned. So let's just anchor to that. Things won't go as planned. Life is organic. We're dealing with other people. There are a lot of variables at stake. Can I adjust? And for me, that thought, no matter what happens, I can adjust and I'll figure it out. And I have what it takes is something that drives confidence. And so I can be in situations where there's unknowns and there's a little bit of risk involved and still lean into it because I'm anchoring to my ability to adjust rather than to perform perfectly. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
And then what's your lens around it? So like, are you pessimistic? So when things don't go as planned, is the first thought, I knew this wasn't going to go as planned, like something bad's going to happen? Or is it like, oh, hell yeah, like what's the next best thing that could possibly happen right now? And so optimism is part of what we would call psychological framework. And I know there's some people listening that when I said optimism, they thought rainbows and ponies and fluffy stuffed animals, and that's not the case. When I think about optimism, I think about special forces operators being dropped into who knows where in the middle of the world, in the middle of the night, and right away things don't go as planned. They've done all of the training. They've done the simulations to prepare. In that situation, do they have the choice to think, well, I knew this wasn't going to go as planned. We're screwed. No, they don't. They don't have that luxury, right? Because their lives are on the line. So for them, it's like, okay, what's the next best option? And so I look at optimism as something that gives us options, the belief that something good is going to happen, right? It gives us options. It keeps us nimble. It allows us to adjust, to stay open to possibilities, to problem solving. And so when I see people who adjust really well, regardless of what's going on, it's because there's a sense that something good could take place and they're able to stay in it for that. And if we look at research around people who are most resilient, they also tend to be high on a scale of optimism. And it's because they're able to shift their attention and their focus when they're in adverse situations to the opportunity in those situations. And they're also able to just approach it with more of a balanced perspective, so that it's not that people who are optimistic, for example, they don't get frustrated or pissed off. They do. Right? But they're able to use a wider range of emotions in managing through those situations, that challenge, that transition, that adversity, so that they can bounce back more easily. So for me, understanding where we derive confidence from. Are your thoughts building confidence? Or are they breaking down confidence? What is your lens towards doing difficult things? Like, do you love challenge? When things get really hard, are you like, oh, hell yeah? Or is it like, man, this sucks, we're here again? If that's the case, like, that's a trainable skill as well. And then just going back to this idea of can you be present when you're in the thick of things? Can you just be in it and have a balanced sense of perspective?
Right. That's so interesting. I've always had a kind of visceral sort of reaction to positivity and optimism, right? And when it just doesn't resonate, like, oh, just think positively and everything will work out. It's like, that never kind of works. And I think a lot of my listeners as well, we're also into risk and uncertainty. And so part of us, we like to think about, scenarios of things and, what could go wrong and, that kind of stuff. But what you talk about is like a skill. It's actually very practical. So about, shifting, refocusing, getting to option B as quickly as possible, all of that stuff makes perfect sense. So it's quite different from this sort of, as you say, the rainbows and unicorns and stuff, that it's not just hoping that something's that there's some basis that you're anchoring the optimism to. That's right.
So here's the thing is, like, if you want to anchor to, like, let's say for confidence, I do difficult things. Say that's a thought that generates confidence for you. And then, like, I can be in difficult things and I'll be okay. That's an optimistic thought, right? If you don't do difficult things on a regular basis, you have no reason to believe that.
Right.
You know, so if you're not getting uncomfortable regularly,
Mm-hmm.
then you can't anchor to that thought, you know. So there is a difference between naive optimism and realistic optimism.
Right.
And I do want to delineate the difference between positive thoughts and productive thoughts. You know, like optimism does not have to be fluffy. In fact, our thoughts that drive confidence, they don't have to feel good either. Like my colleague Courtney, like when things are hard for her, she's like, shit, I'm in it, you know. But that's productive for her,
right?
Versus, my God, it's just one of those days.
Yeah.
Right. That sounds very different. So the question is, like, is it working for you? And if it's not working for you, you are in control of your thoughts, whether you're good at it or not.
Right.
You know, like, you have the ability to change the way you think about it and really anchor to a reason why that thought that you're going to is credible and more optimal in that moment, so that you can do difficult things for long periods of time.
I think that thought of like, oh no, this shit again, you know, that's it's when you said that, I was like, yeah, I've been there. But when you recognize, oh well, wait a minute, that's a thought that it doesn't work. So so let's not have that thought. Let's not give into that thought. Right. Let's give into another thought.
That's right. Yeah. As one way that we train this and we think about this, you know, is like on the national team. If you have the flu, or say you get food poisoning, we travel the world, you know, and so that's likely to happen at some point. A lot of athletes that, let's say on my professional teams, if their throat gets itchy, they won't come to practice. We practice on the USA team.
Right.
I've had teammates run off the court to throw up, and I'm sorry, this is gross, but I've had teammates run off the court to throw up in a garbage can and run back onto the court. You want to know why? Because if it's the gold medal match, are you going to sit out?
Yeah, exactly.
No, you're not sitting out. You know what I mean? But if you've never trained that, if you've never like had to go to practice when you're really sick, how can you trust yourself to show up and do your best in the gold medal match? So we want to train the ability to do difficult things, you know, and we want to train our ability to trust ourselves to do difficult things by putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations more often.
So what we've been talking about, I think, works well at, you know, an individual level. I want to shift a little bit towards teams. Some of my listeners, you know, they manage teams of people, and or it could be, you know, working with your friends or family through a difficult period or something like that. How can you transfer some of this stuff to, you know, if we talk about leadership, to, you know, to others in the context of a wider group of people?
Yeah. So we're talking a little bit about culture and a little bit about leadership, and you know, culture is not words on walls. It's not, you know, fun, inspirational, motivational quotes as it used to be thought of. You know, like back in the 80s and 90s in the United States, if you walked into a corporate office, there'd be those, you know, motivational pictures. You know, that Mount Everest with some cool quote on it. It's like, that's not the fabric of culture. The fabric of culture is relationships. And so what develops relationships? Language. And language is an extension of our thoughts. And so there's a really clear connection between our mindset and how we develop relationships, which directly impacts how we build culture. So if our thoughts are inherently, you know, like frustrated, if we're anxious because we're not sure things are going to work out, if we're fatigued because we're not recovering well, then what's our language like? And then that becomes the fabric of a culture. And so, you know, we're always starting from the standpoint of an individual. If you can't get you right in a moment of test to say the right thing and do the right thing, then it's really hard to be good for others.
Right.
And so as an individual, can you invest in this? And then as a leader, are you just allowing culture to take place organically? Occasionally that'll work, and you'll just, you know, like the stars will align, the puzzle pieces will fit together, and it'll feel good. But is it sustainable? Not sure. As quickly as people are going through organizations, culture can shift quite fast. So you can methodologically develop culture. And one of the ways to do that is to talk about it all the time. Like, what are your cultural anchors? Do you teach about it at the top of meetings? And then to talk about and empower people that you lead or that you are peers with around mindset, So if confidence is something that you feel is really important for the thing that you do, then do you teach confidence? Do you talk about it? Do you work to understand and have a relationship with those around you so that you understand what their thoughts are like, and when it's off for them, how you can help them in a moment of test? Have you done that work for yourself? Because you don't have a credible voice to lead from or coach from if you haven't wrestled with the idea of confidence yourself. So there's all these levers to pull on. The thing about culture is, like, there's no magic wand, and people want a recipe, and we know there are certain characteristics and attributes of high-performing cultures. Psychological safety is one of them. And we know relationships really matter, but what are we doing to actually invest in those? And so that's the biggest question. The way we know how to do that is to start with individuals, to train mindset, and then to develop what we would call high-performance coaches. And you can, when we use the word coach, the way we define that is just optimizing an interaction between one or more persons. But you can use that word interchangeably with leadership or leaders, right? But do you understand, and this is basic psychological theory, how thoughts and emotions drive behavior, and behavior is what drives performance? Okay. So when someone comes to you and they're frustrated and they say, this stuff is BS, so-and-so, and then they start complaining, so-and-so's not doing their job, what do? And one, if you're allowing complaining to take place, you're setting the tone that that's what we do around here, which is setting the tone for culture. Two, do you go straight to strategy and tactics and fixing the problem, or do you try to empower that person to solve problems on their own? And in that just example, this stuff is BS, this so-and-so is not doing their job, right? You can teach so many mindset skills from that if you've done the work, and if you have set the tone in your organization that mindset matters. So this stuff is BS. You could teach optimism. You could teach control. For example, well, what's in your control right now? Like getting a person there, because when you help a person get to what's in their control, then they can do something about it. But when we're in the throes of things and we're not focused on what's in our control, how can you help anyone? And then, like, so-and-so's not doing their job. It's like, okay, what are we doing to develop trust around here? Like, do we have each other's backs? Have you worked? Has this person worked to understand what's going on with that person? Why they might not be doing their job? It feels like these are conversations that take place on teams.
Right.
And these, it feels still new to have these conversations in a corporate environment. And if we don't have these difficult conversations, how can we show up for each other in times of test as a team? So I think, there's three components to it. Is like train mindset, develop high-performing coaches or leaders, and then like do something to methodologically develop culture. We've had conversations with leaders or heads of HR, and we're like, so what's your culture all about? And they'll say, oh, it's on our website. Excuse me? Like, what? Wait a second. Whereas if you asked it, like the USA team going into London or going into Rio, like, hey, what's your culture all about? There are three things that we could point to. This is what we're all about. This is how we do things. It's the same thing for the Seattle Seahawks. They have a culture code, an entire document that explains what culture is, and people know it. They can repeat it. They talk about it often. So Coach Carroll, for example, the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, the co-founder of Compete to Create, when he starts meetings with his 53 athletes and 20-something other coaches, he starts every meeting talking about culture, every meeting talking about mindset, because he values it so much.
Right.
What's stopping us from doing that, right? When you start the top of a meeting talking about something like that, it sets the tone that this really matters. You all matter as human beings, not just as people who produce products. And when we start there, then we can create psychological safety, and then lots of things can fall in place from there.
Yeah, that's very important. I think most corporations are behind the curve on all this stuff, but they need to. Well, there's a huge amount of upside to getting it right. This is the second time on this podcast where we've delved into Pete Carroll, actually.
No kidding.
The first time was Annie Duke she was a World Series of Poker champion, and we talked about decision making, and we talked about the decision to throw the pass in the Super Bowl that allegedly cost the Seahawks the game, and she's adamant that was actually a very good decision. It just didn't work out. Sometimes you from a
statistical standpoint, it was actually the right decision.
Yeah. But sometimes things don't work out, so
That's right.
there's not much you can. You move on. So all those skills are important. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about decisions and how you approach tough decisions under uncertainty. Maybe the last time you've had a tough decision to make, or do you find some decisions to be tougher than others? Or how do you approach decision making?
I anchor to my personal philosophy when I have to make difficult decisions. So those of you out there that are like, what the heck is a personal philosophy? Really, it's just it's your guiding principles. Like what's your filter for your thoughts, words, and actions when you do have to make difficult decisions, or in times of test, times of ease, even a reference point, so to speak. And so I will anchor to my personal philosophy when I have to make difficult decisions, which my philosophy is live curiously, wildly, and wisely. And I also have moved away from this idea that things are difficult or things are hard, and it's just it is what it is. I have a decision that I need to make. Yeah, things are things. And sometimes I can feel something more coming up for me, and then it's just good information. But I try to move away from emotional-based decisions. And if I feel like I'm in a space where emotions are on board, then I'll create space for myself to take a beat and really understand what's coming up for me, to be able to come back and respond in a way that is in alignment with my personal philosophy. So if, as you can imagine, I say yes to a lot of things. If my personal philosophy is live curiously, wildly, and wisely, I say yes to a lot. And then there's a calibration that has to take place. Like, should I have said yes to that? But for me, I look at so many things as an opportunity that they don't feel difficult, or that they just feel like this wonderful challenge that I'm about to embark on.
Right.
So I think part of it is understanding like what comes up for you. Why does it feel difficult for you? And from there, that information that you get from your thoughts and your emotions can be a good compass for what to do next, if you're really paying attention.
That's such a great way to approach uncertainty, because particularly, sometimes we build up to things like the big decision to do this or that. And I suppose it translates onto the court that, this is a big pivotal moment in the match, and it might be or might not be. But I suppose if you just try and treat all the moments as moments, then you can only do your best, right?
Yeah. Inherently, like the next moment is unknown. Like, I have no idea what I'm going to say next. But if we can embrace that, then it's like, well, this is just the nature of things, the way things are. There's uncertainty, and that's okay. And then it's like, I can adjust. I go back to that. You know what I mean? So, pressure, stress, risk, these are all perceptions that are due to our attributions, how we think about and explain things to ourselves. And so if we reframe, change, adjust, move the needle on our attributions, how we think about things, then they feel less distressful. Then we can dissolve pressure. Then risk feels like more of, is this dangerous or is this a risk? And do I enjoy risk taking? Because I know that it gets me to the edge of my capacity. And when I'm on the edge of my capacity, I have the opportunity to grow. So there's an adjustment that can take place in how we think about the things that we're doing, how we're designing our lives, that maybe in the future, like, it doesn't feel distressful for you.
Right. That's so awesome. I love that. That's so great. How did you get into mindset work in the first place?
Oddly, I was a two-time Olympian before I learned that you could formally train your mind. And our team actually started working with Dr. Mike Gervais,
Right.
the other co-founder of our company. And so that was the first time that in a pragmatic, formal way, I started training my mind. And I just started to notice, what that was like for me, and the difference. I was already one of the best in the world, but more so like the difference in what my recovery was like and what my experience was like at that stage in my career. Training my mind it fundamentally changed those two things for me. And then I retired in 2015. I'd hoped to go to a third Olympics, but I actually had 4 concussions in 2 years at the end of my career. And so it felt like it was time, and my passion was waning. And so I decided to retire. And it was just a little bit before I retired that Compete to Create had kind of struck up a relationship with Microsoft. Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft, had kind of just taken over, and a couple months into his role as CEO, Coach Carroll keynoted at Microsoft. And his expertise is in developing high-performing cultures. And so that's what he was talking about. And Satya came up to him and said, this is exactly what I've been thinking for the culture at Microsoft. How do we do this, more or less? So as I was retiring, I've known the Carroll family for 20 years because Coach Carroll came to
You were at USC,
right?
At the same time,
and his daughter played volleyball, and she's the president of the company. And so she was actually telling me, and then I knew Dr. Mike from working with him, from our team working with him, I should say, and so she was telling me what they were doing, and I was like, that sounds great. I actually had already sent out my resume to my USC network, and I was getting a lot of calls back. I think because people just wanted to talk to me because they made certain assumptions about me as an Olympic athlete, but a lot of them were for corporate sales jobs. And I actually had the mindset when I retired that I've lived this dream job and it's been amazing, and I'm not sure anything can top it. So I thrive in challenging situations. Why don't I just find a really challenging job that's good paying, that will facilitate my passions in life, And so I was interviewing for these well-paying corporate sales jobs, but something just kept it just something was missing, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And I started to talk to Jamie, formerly Carroll, now Davern, the president of our company. She was telling me about the work that Compete to Create was doing with Microsoft. And I said, I can do that, which is what I say all of the time. And then I'm like, wait, can you do that, Nicole? And she was like, well, let me talk to the team. And anyways, at that time, it was just Dr. Mike doing everything. He did. I flew up to Seattle to watch a day with him training 150 C-suite executives on mindset, and it was all very familiar to me because our team had worked with him. Sure. But I watched this thing happen, and this is true, I think, for a lot of people who get into mindset training, is that they do it from the lens of performance. When Mike first came to our team, it was like, hey, you can train your mind and mindfulness and all this stuff. We're like, all we heard was like, this will help you win a gold medal. And so then we're like on board, And so what takes place usually is that at the beginning of the day, and this was true of this experience, is like all of the questions were about, more or less, how does this make me more productive in my role here? And then at 2 p.m., some guy raised his hand and said, I have a 14-year-old niece. How do I teach her about this? And I was like, you get it. That's it right there. So I joke that I was like watching humans evolve over an 8-hour period. Right. But I was able to put my finger on what felt like it was missing was the impact piece, and just being around really switched on people, which you're fortunate to do if you're an Olympic athlete, and have a tribe of people like that. And so I was like, yeah, sign me up, let's go. And so I was already familiar with, because I had lived through the process of training my own mind and training mindset. I was already familiar with that when I first started working with Compete to Create. But then what was most overwhelming for me at the time when I retired and I first started working with Compete to Create was how much more I wanted to learn so that I could have a greater depth and breadth of knowledge to be able to share not just my experiences, but to help others, which is why I'm back in school and doing that whole thing. So
wow, that's deep. That's deep stuff. because
Is it?
I find it, because when you describe this, the scenario in Microsoft, and you go and you can pitch a big organization about enhanced productivity and metrics and all this stuff, but it's the same thing as looking at the scoreboard, or getting statted out or whatever. That these are all people, and so people want to feel good when they're working, and as a byproduct of that, they work better. But they don't, leading with we're going to increase productivity or sales by X% or whatever is I think it's a harder sell, I suppose. Or when you're working with folks in a big corporation, it's when you start to connect with them, and then I love that feeling of what it feels like when you and Dr. Mike talk about what it feels like when things are going your way, and getting people into that sort of space of feeling it, I think is really valuable. And then they perform, as a byproduct, they perform better.
That's right.
But we get it backwards a lot. So.
The model's completely backwards. It feels like, I don't know what it's like in the UK right now, but it feels like it is shifting.
Yeah.
And that, people are bringing all dimensions of themselves to work.
It's shifting.
Rather than wearing one hat when they come to work and wearing another hat when they're home with their loved ones, another hat, as a weekend warrior, doing whatever they're doing. So.
It's shifting, but I think it's shifting slowly. And I also think that the millennials they're shifting it more quickly.
They're forcing function.
But sometimes I wonder whether or not we, that sort of grit side of things, where, that generation has that. Maybe I'm being overly generalizing, but I don't know. But this has been fabulous. We've covered a lot of really cool ground. Was there anything that you wanted to mention that we didn't get a chance to cover off?
No, I love this conversation. If anything is resonating with you as a listener, I encourage you to, not to sound salesy, but I'm passionate about this. I've dedicated my whole life to helping people find joy in the pursuit of what's possible. So if this sounds interesting to you, pop over to compete2create.net and check out our course. It's called Find Your Best. If you want to use the discount code ND, Nicole Davis, ND50, get $50 off. And I'm in there as a mindset coach, and guiding you along the way, which is a unique part of the course relative to other online courses that you can take. But would love to see you in there. Love to help you on be part of the journey with you. Yeah,
it was a really awesome course. I can attest to the fact that it really is an excellent and very well put together course. So I urge my listeners to check it out.
Cool, thanks.
And where can people find you on social networks and all that good stuff?
Yeah, I think most of my social handles are Nicole M Davis 6. In the process of actually trying to change that just to Nicole Davis, but I am Googleable. So if you punch in Nicole Davis volleyball, most of my social handles will pop up. But Nicole M Davis 6 is my website, my Instagram, my Twitter, all that good stuff. And then you can also, LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn at Nicole Davis, and you can follow Compete to Create as well on social. We're active there.
That's so awesome. Thanks so much, Nicole. This was great. I love this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been fun. I appreciate you.
Thanks. Bye for now. All right. If you enjoyed that and found it useful, give Nicole a follow. Be sure to check out Compete to Create and check out their course, Finding Your Best, which I've completed and highly recommend. Links to all of those things are, of course, in the show notes. And speaking of courses, check out our own How to Make Impossible Decisions with Calm and Confidence. Check out the link to that, which is also in the show notes. That is all for now, but we'll be back soon. Until then, and as always, don't forget, risk is life.